What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Mark. Today is season 6, episode 7, and I have one of my all-time favorite keyboard players, period, Mr. Lee Pardini. Thank you so much for joining me, man.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
and thank
dude.
you for the kind words. It's always nice to hear, but thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm a guitar player first and foremost, but I play keys too. So it's like I live in both worlds. That's why I like to have keys on here and guitar stuff. So it's not all guitar centric, but dude, I have so much I want to talk to you about. But first and foremost, congratulations on being a father. That's
Thank
pretty
you.
awesome.
Yep, thank you very much. I'm 3 weeks into it, so I'm as we were saying just a minute ago, I'm clueless, but figuring it out. So it's been a great experience, and our little one Kiona is just so sweet and just such a. I mean, she's so cute. I'm biased, but she's gorgeous, and she's such a sweet-hearted, innocent little infant. It's just so interesting to see the little changes and what she responds to. It's a whole new world. So
that's awesome. Do you play for her a little bit in the house? And like,
I've started to. I was very conscious about making noise at all in the first week or so. So I wasn't sitting down to play. I had to learn a bunch of songs for a gig pretty early on. So I think she was hearing a little bit of muted piano through the walls. I have a guitar set up by my piano too, and so I'll pick a little bit for her. And I can't help but try and keep writing. Like I don't have all the time, at least uninterrupted time to like focus on that. But I had started working on something before she was born, and I kind of caught an idea, a week ago that I've been trying to hash out. And so like, I'm always sort of like, if she's sort of down, even if she's awake, we kind of have her in her bassinet in the front. I'm like kind of subtly trying to work out an idea. So she's kind of picking it up, and we've certainly been playing some music for her. We had a whole birth playlist. She's definitely not unaccustomed to like music being on or anything like that. So I think it bodes well for, her growing up in this house, at least,
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, man. I mean, it's such a joy when you can share that stuff. I mean, like we will jump forward and backward, but like my kid, I turned her on to We're All Gonna Die.
Oh, nice.
She's 11, and she like fell in love with one of us, and like she wanted to do like a like solo acoustic version of that because she's a singer. So I was like, okay, because I can't sing an A over middle C, but like sure you can.
Not many people can. It's hard.
Woo, yeah.
I can't.
Yeah. So she did that, but she's all into it too, man. It's so fun when you see like this like trajectory happen with your kid, and man, you're such a good time. You're gonna
and what they're gonna be into. I mean, yeah, like we could talk for hours about this, I'm sure. I'm very curious as to like how our tastes will align and how they won't. Like, is she going to be into Sun Ra? I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I've gone through a heavy phase with that recently, or anything kind of avant-garde in the jazz world. I don't want to like push that on her, but maybe, I've got a nice record collection here that maybe one of these days I'll sit down with her and be like, why don't you just pick one? We'll listen to it and see if you like it. Like, or is she going to be into Aerosmith? I don't, there's all these questions I have that I'm so excited to tell her how I came to those records and what they mean to me. I know that at a certain point, kids definitely don't want to hear that, and they'll roll their eyes at old dad just telling them about their heyday. But I'm sure it'll be a joy for me nonetheless, whether or not she's like embarrassed, and doesn't want me to drop her off at school because, whatever, I'm projecting, but it'll be fun to experience.
Oh, dude, it's all a journey. It's all a journey. I mean, my wife listens to the complete opposite spectrum of what I listen to. And my kid was like all into like the Katy Perry thing and the pop stuff, which is fine. I'm like, I do whatever you want, man. But like at some point she started to like come to the dark side and come to like my listening tastes. Yeah. So now we're in the car the other day. We drove to Annapolis in Maryland. She's like, hey, Dad, because I was driving. She's like, Mom, do you care if we put Dawes on?
Oh, like, that's awesome.
Shots fired. But like, yeah, so it's cool, dude. Like it's such a fun journey. But all right, here we go. Got a page of notes here. Lee, I'm so curious, dude. Like I ask everybody this question, but what is like your earliest musical memory?
Okay, that's a great question. I have a couple that I think probably kind of circle around a timeline. I'm not exactly sure which one came first. Um, and I guess they fall in two different categories. So one, I remember as a really really young kid. It was we would go visit my grandma. My grandma and grandpa lived up in Santa Rosa, California, and I grew up in the Bay Area. So in San Jose, I mean Santa Rosa is a couple hours. It's kind of in the North Bay area. We would go, and um, at the time, my uncle was living with them, and he had a drum set because he was a drummer, uh, casual kind of drummer. I think he played in some bands at some point, but they also had like an electric organ that really like properly was termed like kind of the grandma's organ at that point. It was really
Nice.
like big and kind of churchy and had all these push buttons. It wasn't a Hammond B3. It wasn't anything like that. And I remember being very taken with probably what was just the bright lights and colors and buttons. But my uncle would sit with me and he would, give me a drumstick. Like there's a picture of me at his drum set at a really, really young age. And I remember those moments. I also vaguely remember my first concert experience, which would have been somewhere around the same age, was at a place called Great America, which is a theme park, and they had like small little amphitheater where I was there, but my parents took us all to go see Tower of Power opened for Kenny Loggins.
What?
And this was like Kenny Loggins, like
Heyday.
heyday. I mean, like maybe a little past Top Gun theme song, but like he was touring that music. It was kind of fresh from, Highway to the Danger Zone era Kenny Loggins, where he was, just the movie man, like making all those songs. And I don't remember much else except being somewhat alarmed at how loud the bass was in general. Like I remember feeling it like rumble my little kid chest. I don't even know how. I could have been 3, I could have been 2. I don't really remember
Wow.
the exact age, but those were my earliest musical memories that I can think of at this point.
Man, that's crazy. So it sounds like you had a pretty supportive musical family growing up. Like if you were exposed to that stuff, is that true or?
Definitely. I was
Okay.
really lucky in that sense. I mean, there was a little bit of music in the family with my uncle being kind of casual with playing drums. My parents weren't musicians, and would say they can't hold a tune, although I've never heard them sing much, so I can't confirm or deny that, that fact. I do know that they have great taste in music. And so when we were growing up, my brother and I have an older brother, and he also has great taste in music. We got it from somewhere. I mean, it's clear we got it from our folks, and they were certainly supportive when I wanted to start taking piano lessons. But even before that, and throughout my whole experience taking lessons and on through high school, we would have dinner together every night, and they would, at a certain point, encourage me or my brother. We would take turns, like kind of playing DJ a little bit. They had a nice stereo, but like a decent kind of CD collection. And at a certain point, we got to choose the music, and it so much of it was stuff that they liked. I mean, I wasn't putting on Rage Against the Machine because it wasn't dinner appropriate, even if that's kind of where my head was going at a certain age. I wasn't going to play Radiohead at dinner, but we would listen to the Eagles, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Carole King, and they were just visiting, to meet their granddaughter. And that's still the stuff we put on at the house. Like even unprompted, I'm putting on music for dinner, and it's like, yeah, let's put on anything like that. Joni Mitchell, Jim Croce.
Mm-hmm.
So they were supportive to give me the freedom. They had the trust to like, okay, yeah, well, why don't we let them pick? And it's not going to be something horrendous. And
Mm-hmm.
they instilled like what I see as pretty solid taste, you know. Um, Billy Joel and Elton John, even before I was taking piano, that was a big thing in the house too. So it was kind of classic folk, rock and roll. Um, so I just, you know, they were very supportive overall.
Man, it's like it's like not only just like the good taste kind of thing, but like the music appreciation, like appreciating the art of music in a way. Like, how old were you when they were giving you the keys to the kingdom for like DJing? How old like were you guys?
That probably started closer to 11 or 12, I would
Okay.
say. But my brother's 6 years older, so he probably got the keys to the, you know, to the stereo as it is around the same age for him. And so like that was a thing in our house from, you know, me being 6 or so. And it was just fun because then, you know, we would be able to engage together on that. There was certainly plenty of things in my collection that they didn't respond to, and even vice versa. Like I was never much into, well, I don't know about specifically. There was just, you know, we weren't always aligned, but when we would agree on something to put on, or they would tolerate what I put on, you know, we would talk about it a little bit too. And they certainly were very supportive about taking me out to see concerts. They took us to go see the Rolling Stones
Oh,
when the Stones were touring for Voodoo Lounge, which was early 90s. And so I
okay.
was young. Um, I think that was a contact high that I got for the first time at that show. I remember that. I remember that sounds crazy. And then I remember my eyes kind of burning. I don't remember being stoned or anything. It was just sort of like my eyes are itchy and kind of red, and I'm a little tired, but it was also a long show. So
Right,
I
right.
don't know.
I have a real big craving for Cheetos right now, man. I don't know
Yeah,
what's going on, bro.
it was a
Oh,
funny scene, and it was a hell of a show. I remember that.
yeah.
So
That's
it was good.
killing, man. Dude, all right. So I'm gonna try to get through all this stuff as much as I can, at least. But so okay, so you just mentioned Billy Joel, you mentioned Elton John.
Mhm.
I've had a couple other keyboard players on here. I had Gabe Dixon, who's the keyboard player in Tedeschi Trucks band. And we were talking, he's a huge Elton fan, and I love Tumbleweed Connection. That's like one of my favorite records, period. But
Mhm.
like, was that stuff like listening to like proper kind of like pop rock piano players? Was that a large portion of your inspiration to kind of get behind the keys? And like, how did that transition into the love of jazz? And like, what records were you exposed to early on for the jazz stuff too?
Well, the jazz stuff didn't come until a little bit later. Like that, I was probably, let's see, if I started taking lessons when I was 8, I was 4 or 5 years in before someone kind of was like, "Hey, you should check this out. I think you might dig it." And you know, with the Billy Joel stuff, that was huge. More so than Elton. I mean, I do love Elton, and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is a huge album for me. And but it was more with Billy that I was like really taken by his piano playing. And when I was starting to get much more confident on the instrument, like he's where I gravitated to it and started to like maybe pick up on some of his vocabulary, which I mean, stylistically, in a general sense, you know, they're in the same category of piano driven rock and roll, but they are very different piano players, obviously.
Yeah.
And Billy Joel just had something that I was drawn to more, maybe a little flashier, like there's a bit more chops in his playing or something. And you know, I'm not saying anything like Elton's certainly a very technically capable piano player, so nobody come after me for that. I'm just saying, to me at that point, like Billy Joel, he was speaking to me more, and that I think informed kind of a pop sensibility in my brain, and when I started being able to play a little bit of stuff here and there of Billy Joel's, like I think I that coincided with somebody telling me about Bill Evans and like
Mm.
giving me a record and even like I feel like it would have been too early for me to really grasp a transcription or anything like that. That would have been a little too advanced. But just like the style and the sound of it was what hit me first. And I don't know if I really connected those dots fully, but one thing kind of led into it, and they were kind of like swimming around in the same pool a little bit for me.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting too is because if I listen to you play, the thing that strikes me the most about how you play the instrument is how you phrase things. Like there's a big fingerprint there in terms of even the voicings that you choose to play. I always was just really kind of knocked out about how you approach a melodic line, or like your solo on the Rooftop record on Feed the Fire. The first time I heard that, I was like, Jesus, like, because I was just like, what is he doing there? Like, and it's not like I can tell what you're doing, but it's how you attack a melodic line that I find is very much so you. Like, it's your voice.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, yeah. Sometimes I'm, all of us are a little too close to it, and maybe a bit self-effacing to recognize that. So I do appreciate that. It's definitely been a long journey. If it's even arrived at anything in that regard, it's something I think that I'm always striving for.
Yeah, man.
Phrasing especially is like, I don't know if there's this. I don't know him personally, but this guy Kiefer he's just a beautiful piano player, keyboard player. He's out here in LA, and he does some really great stuff. And I don't know if I totally agree with this clip that I saw of him where he was like, notes are notes or notes. Like the notes don't matter. It's phrasing and feel. And I was like, okay, phrasing and feel, yes. For me, they're also number one. I do think I put a lot of importance into the notes. Because, and maybe there's some line back to Billy Joel. There's the Bill Evans influence, like these really early influences for me. They're really melodic players. I mean, like Billy Joel as a rock and roll piano player is maybe a little less melodic than he is as a songwriter and a singer. And so like his vocal melodies are like probably constantly swirling in my head at some point in the day. And Bill Evans was so lyrical with his playing. And so that combined with the fact that I feel like I'm around and get to work with some of my favorite singers, some really just amazing vocalists with really brilliant ears for melody, that's I can't help but incorporate that, and so melody and phrasing and feel, I do think they're all important, but the phrasing is, it's kind of, I think more of what people respond to as well. It's just sort of like, they're not going to know the vocabulary of the harmony and the melody as much as they're going to be able to instinctually feel why it feels good or something. And that's why I think it kind of comes up a little notch above,
Yeah, man. I mean, it really is. And even the way that you incorporate like voice leading into, even if you're playing just a straight up, if you're in a verse or in a chorus, like I just like the way that you use voice leading in your inversions to kind of complement what's happening with the melody that's on the top line melody. It just always feels like it's appropriate. Like I mentioned that in a little description of this show, and I was just like, every project I've heard you on, it's like you know how to play to a song. And then when somebody kind of says, all right, here's the reins, just blow, yeah. you do it, and you play appropriately in that context too. So that's a hard thing. That's I think a lot of kind of young musicians, I don't think they really understand it. Like you said, it takes a while to get to that musical maturity level.
It does. And it certainly was not easy along the way, as I don't imagine it really is for anybody. I feel like I did get really lucky where I was always around singers. Like a lot of the work, or even just before it became professional work, when I was in high school and I was starting to be good enough to get hired for things, it was a lot of theater, and it was a lot of like choir accompaniment and these settings where like your only job is just to support that. You're going to derail an entire rehearsal or a performance if you step too far outside. And so I think part of my early days were pretty like, they were spent in that lane where like I would start to push out pretty heavily at a certain point, and then getting into the jazz thing, finding kind of more appropriate ways to voice lead or in some instances, even like kind of slightly reharmonize things. It's funny, I was going to say with the Feed the Fire thing, that was our first performance back after things had shut down in the pandemic. And so like so much of that was just like built up angst and energy. We were all like just revving our engines for however many months. And, you know, at that point, I guess I'd have to think really hard. I mean, it was at least 3 or 4 months, you know, and before we figured out, okay, we can do this, we can pull it off. This is the structure, this is how we're going to do it. And we hadn't really played it all together, if at all, with anybody else, because everything was shut down. So like there was a real fresh like energy to that one that, you know, it's hard to tap into that every time we play that song. You have to find new sources of energy, you know.
Yeah,
it's tough.
Well, it's a killing version of that song. I love it. So let me just talk to you really quickly. So the first time I saw you play was right before the shutdown. I came to see Theo, and it was probably 2020, and you guys came to DC. And Jordan got me in to the gig, got me some tickets, which was really nice of him. But I remember specifically that night, the one moment that stuck out to me was the Lily solo. Like when you just went off and we're playing out and all this stuff. And there was probably some people there that were like, what's going on?
Yeah. Like, hello.
Like, do this forever. Do this all night. This is fantastic. And then like when you and Jordan were kind of playing together, just you two, it was so, first of all, I love seeing, you know, one of my friends play with one of my favorite artists, but then to see you play, like, who the hell is this dude? And then I'm like, oh my God, this band is so good. Like I left there so inspired. Cause you know how sometimes you don't go see live music for a while. And then the first time you go, it's like the same thing you were talking about with the rooftop show. Is like, you go to this show and you come away like, yes, like it's just like fed something inside of you. You know what I mean?
Yep, definitely.
But dude, that night that's the first time I saw you play. And then I was like, okay, like I got to go see them again soon. And then the world shut down. And I was like, damn it.
Dude, I mean, for one, let me speak to how crazy good Jordan Rose is on drums, and how with that band specifically, it was so, I'm not going to say it was so easy. I think that's it wasn't so easy all the time to build the solos and for all of us to find our moments and reach these peaks. But it was about as easy as it could get with those guys like Joe Dart, Jordan Rose, that had Trevor Manier on guitar, and Theo playing. I mean, that band was so good that I knew I had so much freedom in the groove alone. Like the freedom that Jordan would provide for me to push and pull or throw an idea at him, and his ears are just so good that he would take that, respond to it, surprise us all with something cool, and then everybody would respond. I mean, that, I think for the rest of my life, that'll be one of the best rhythm sections and bands that I've ever been able to be a part of. So, you know, so there's that, you know, credit where credit's due on their end. But also with that show, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm thinking about, I'm pretty sure I'm thinking of the right DC show. That was a rare occasion that they had a backline, they had a grand piano at the venue.
Yeah.
So like we show up for sound check and they're like, oh, hey, they got this beautiful Yamaha baby grand, because it was a really classy spot.
Yeah.
And it was, I forget the name of that venue. I'd have to look it up, but it was like,
I can't remember.
It was gorgeous. It had more of like I mean, I don't want to say dinner theater by any means, but it was.
No, totally.
It kind of had a jazz club aesthetic where you would have seated tables and a nice stage that obviously like you just rolled out this Yamaha baby grand. And I remember getting there. I think I, for some reason, was a bit late. And I think either Theo, it must have been Theo, texted me, or the tour manager, like, hey, you know, they got this thing here. You want to use it? And sometimes I'm like, I regret the decision to play the house piano, because who knows how in tune it is, who knows the tone of it in general. And And depending on the band, how are we going to hear it? How is it going to be fed back through the monitors at a level that's going to enable you to play comfortably? Like, we all run up against these technical issues with house pianos all the time. That one was like just so gorgeous, and it was so clear that it was such a joy to play. I mean, you know, like it's like you sit down at instruments and it just immediately like responds to you and you to it, kind of like there's this thing that happens, like, you know, when you pick up like a beautiful classic guitar or plug it through a great amp. I mean, you get kind of chills with it. That was the only show of that tour where we had anything like that. And we could have done a whole set of instrumentals as far as I was concerned, because that piano was fun to play. And I loved my rig otherwise for that tour, but it wasn't even close to playing something like that. Because the guy, even when I got, the venue manager was like, oh yeah, man, we just had like, who did he say? It probably wasn't Herbie Hancock, but it was somebody big and some like much greater piano player than me. And I was like, if it's good enough for him, let's roll it out. If it's cool with the rest of the band, it occupies a lot of space. Somewhere out there, I know Theo has a recorded copy of that show. I'll have to get it from him. But like,
oh man,
it was kind of a rare thing, and I'm glad you got to see that. Because I remember that show being really, really fun. Not only because of that piano, but because of the style of the club. Like, we played very dynamically to the room, which speaks to how good that band was too. So I know I'm rambling about it, but I'm glad you saw that show. Because that was definitely a highlight of that tour for sure. And, you know, considering what happened almost immediately following, like, it's a good one to like sort of, you know, hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely, I think that might've been the first time I saw Theo, possibly, but I've been a Wolfpack fan since 2011 or something. So it's like what I knew.
They were just in the basement. Yeah.
Yeah. But, so, okay, cool. So that's the first time I see you. Okay. Now, I'll be completely honest. I'm late to the Dawes game, but I have consumed every freaking thing I possibly could. Now, here's how it happened. My buddy John and I went to see Pearl Jam. I love Pearl Jam. They're like one of my favorite bands.
Me too.
Why I play guitar. But so we go to see Pearl Jam in Camden, New Jersey. And we're coming home, and I'm like, we're like sharing music with each other. I'm like playing him some Madison Cunningham, and we're talking about all this other stuff. And he's like, have you ever listened to Dawes? And I was like, I know of Dawes, but I've never really had the chance to listen to it. And he's like, all right, let me put this record on. So he put on We're All Gonna Die. And when I heard doo-doo, 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 I was like, oh my God, what is going to happen? and I so identified, I was like, this is the most brilliant 12-bar 1-4-5 kind of progression thing, but broken up in all these weird arpeggios and stuff. I'm like, this is brilliant. What is this? And we listened to the whole record. And then when I found out, I was like, oh my God, Lee is in this band. What the hell? Like, so then I fell in love. But that record, I don't know if I wanted to ask you about this, because there's been a couple records in my life that completely changed my life. Like when I was at Berkeley, one of a piano professor that I studied with showed me Johnny Lang's Turnaround. And that record blew my mind. And then I had another professor who played me Voodoo for the first time. And I was like, what the hell? Where have I been?
Yeah, totally.
But I would put We're All Gonna Die in that category for me, because it really, as a songwriter, guitarist, whatever, it has totally shifted my focus on what's important about a song. And I know Taylor is a masterful songwriter, and all you guys are masterful at your instruments and creating and arranging music and putting things together cohesively. But there is something so special about that record, will stick with me in particular throughout my lifetime as a seminal moment. Do you have a record like that, or a couple records that have totally changed the way you think about music or your musicality in general?
Great question. Yes, I definitely do. One of them, honestly, is probably Voodoo as well, because that was, I mean, I listened to that so much, and I think when I discovered that album. I was in college studying music, and it had become such a it was just such a game changer for everything. I mean, in terms of production, in terms of like bass playing for sure. I mean, like I first listened, had no idea what was going on. It's like, well, this is, what is this? And then you start to analyze it with your friends and, like colleagues at music school, and you start to pick it apart. You're like, that is game changing. And then you start to go to jam sessions and play gigs, and like everybody's trying to cop that. And so it's like, it was really pervasive for how everybody played. And I think I don't know if I'd put it on the same tier as like how it was a game changer for, I mean, it was a game changer for me, but Roy Hargrove's first RH Factor record, it's very much related to Voodoo in that they were the same kind of time. Roy Hargrove played on Voodoo, and so much of that sound of that record is his trumpet. And I think that was, those were big records for me, and that's kind of in like the soul jazz realm, and how I was associating jazz and like groove music and things like that. I mean, I think far and away, it's hard for me to say definitively like which one would be the most influential, but like, OK Computer was just huge for me. Like at such an early age, I really digested that album, and I was like lost in that and still am, like forever. That record really blew my mind. And I think there's a lot that I would probably be able to trace back on a record like We're All Gonna Die, like how you're subtly creating melodic content and making tonal choices under like songs. I think one of my earliest experiences kind of absorbing that type of thing was with OK Computer. And so that's definitely one of them. Let's see if I can think of it. I mean, in terms of jazz playing, Sunday at the Village Vanguard, I mean, I know I mentioned Bill Evans already, but
yeah, man,
Sunday at the Village Vanguard, not even so much about his piano playing vocabulary, but like for a tone for a record, it still gives me chills when I listen to it, at how intimate and just like expansive, like, Paul Motion's, he's playing on brushes and their interplay, but like there's this sort of grayness to it. I mean, it's a little bit of a murky gray day in LA, and I don't know if that's informing this at all either, but like the cover of that record's black and white. It's got this sort of like, I remember I forget who it was, but back when CDs were really the dominant format, there were these compilations called like Jazz for a Rainy Day or Bossa Nova for a whatever day. Like they would have these pretty basic compilations, more or less, but it was and I don't know what label put it out, but I remember Bill Evans being on one of those compilations, discovering Sunday at the Village Vanguard, and like kind of connecting this sort of emotion to what they were doing that was just really deep and really thoughtful, sensitive, all this sort of stuff that I think I obsessed over that record, and then a lot of other Bill Evans stuff at such a formative age in my piano playing that I'm always trying to tap into that a little bit. Like, he's sort of quoted as like, I don't know what the quote is necessarily, but his main purpose seemingly was like just beauty in music, just playing something that was beautiful. And like, I have other influences that come to the forefront sometimes where I'm like, I'm looking for more aggression or like more crazy, just gnarly stuff as much. But like when I sit down at piano, the thing that comes out naturally is much more in line with that. So I'd say that would be a long-winded way of answering your question.
No, I mean? Dude, that's great. Are you into Hornsby at all?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's a pretty big one. Like The Way It Is was a big record at my house with my parents.
Mm.
So that would be playing alongside, some albums at a certain point that I thought were funny that I've revisited that are like just so awesome. One of them is One Heartbeat by Smokey Robinson.
Oh,
Like we all
okay.
know Smokey for his classic stuff, but he's a musical genius. Like he had like a record in like 1988 or 89 or whatever it was. That's it leaves a bit to be desired in some of the drum sounds, but the songs and I love that record. But that lives in the same world as The Way It Is. And I've always been a Hornsby fan. My knowledge doesn't go that deep with his catalog
Mm.
for as much as, I mean, I'm not trying to draw a comparison between me and Bruce Hornsby. It's just that some people sometimes say that they hear a Hornsby influence in my playing.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of it's circumstantial because you throw a piano solo in Americana or roots rock and roll,
Right.
and he really like did a massive service for like bringing that to the forefront. Like his style is pretty unique, because it's a lot of mix of influences or mix of styles and things all coming together. But he's also he's a melodic player too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he's playing like he's singing, and I think that's why he's so universally loved.
Yeah. And
Some
I
people
think,
hate him, but most people love him, I think,
yeah, I mean, I love him, dude. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about that, and I could hip you to some stuff that you may really love, but like, I can see how, like, all right, Lee throws in attention in the place that someone might not hear attention, then Hornsby does it, like, oh, there's the comparison, like,
Yeah.
but I don't really see it as much, but like that dude, the way he can split his brain, it's like not on the level of Hiromi. That
Right.
woman, woo, that woman is out of control. But like,
Yeah.
Hornsby has that thing, and that's what I always admire about you guys is just being able to split that, so you can kind of independently do these crazy things. Like, there's a song. Do you know his song "What a Time"? It's off of Harbor Lights, I think. You should check that one out.
I'm not sure I do. I'll definitely check it out.
What a Time is the name of the song. You should check that. That one
Okay.
is you would probably love that. Speaking of tones, all right. So Lee, I just bought a new keyboard. I bought a Yamaha YC series keyboard. Do you know about those?
I do.
Dope.
Yeah. Yep.
So there is an organ in there that's straight up the roll with the punches sound in there. So what the hell was that tone? How did you guys get those sounds? Like, the way that you record your keys, however you guys do it, I'm always super impressed with the different types of sounds you're getting. But what was that?
Well, Blake Mills is a tone genius. I mean, and it like, for context, like that was my first record with Dawes, and at that point I wasn't even a member of the band. I was coming in having done a tour or two, and like I was so happy to be invited to the recording process, and especially to work with Blake. And so I knew the history of him with the rest of the band, and so like I was, I knew I was going to learn a lot in the experience and be challenged a lot. And one of those really long lasting effects from that session was this, I think, because we had our friend kind of filming that session, and a lot of us talked about the tone quest as it is. Like we were just on a tone quest at all times. And that's kind of Blake's one of many things. But I think that one of my favorite things about him is his ability to subvert people's expectations and make certain instruments sound like, very unique, like you wouldn't have ever heard it before. And I think that's just so valuable to modern music, because yes, I do love a Telly through a deluxe, or a Hammond through a Leslie. And that can be the best, most amazing thing, the best choice in that moment. But we had a blast on that record, like really spending time cross-legged on the floor, third cup of coffee in hand, or a certain point in the night, a little whiskey or tequila, just trying to figure out like what happens when you do this. And, it's not for the faint-hearted or whatever, or like you have to exercise taste in those moments, because like sure, you can make something sound really messed up and really distorted. That doesn't mean that's the right choice, and it doesn't mean it sounds good either. So
Right.
you have to be very maybe it's like you have to be kind of judicious with how you make those choices. And so with that sound specifically, we had done some pre-production as a band without Blake, most of which was thrown out the window on day one, which I don't think any of us regret doing. It kind of informed certain part choices for me. Right. One of which was that I was going to play the melody, like the kind of the chorus melody on the intros and reintros of that song, which I've, even before we landed on that tone, I was really excited about because it's kind of a lead moment. I was doing it. I think I was doing it on the Hammond. I'm sure there's some pre-production recording where I'm messing around with it, like two-handed piano in Hammond or any iteration of those two things. And we started playing it for Blake, and he was like, "Oh, you know what? Why don't you try it on the clav?" And then he hooked up the clav through the Leslie, and then through trial and error, like we kind of found the right amount of distortion, which I don't even remember what we used to blow it up like that.
I was gonna say, was it a guitar pedal? Like, what were you pushing? How are you pushing it that hard?
It was something very boutique, and it certainly was a guitar pedal of some sort. I just can't remember. It was like somebody, I know, one of the guys remembers what it was. If Blake doesn't remember, I'm not sure, but it was a clav. Like I brought in all my keyboards to that session, and however we started doing it, I just ended up over on the clav by way of Blake's suggestion. And then like, we just kind of found our way into that. And like, so it kind of sounds like an organ because of the Leslie. And when I play it live, I don't tour with a clav. And even if I did, like, I don't have the capabilities to like, you know, like some type of A/B switch into a preamp to get that sometimes through the Leslie and then the Hammond through the Leslie the rest of the time. And that's just too complicated. And so I just overdrive the organ and it gets it close enough. But there's an attack and a subtle tonal difference with the way the clav works mechanically that the organ will just never do it exactly the same. So that's kind of the process with that. It was sort of like we would tone quest. And then once we were kind of there, it'd be like, tape's rolling, let's go. And so it was a blur to a certain degree.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, because the clav, I don't feel like you could achieve the amount of percussion that you achieved. Like, you couldn't do that with the B3. There's almost like so much percussive nature from those notes. Like, you can hear that like click almost of the percussiveness.
Yep.
Even though you can do that with a B3, I think there's more attack on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the quacky element for sure. And a lot of people would be like, man, I thought that was a guitar. And I was like, well, yeah, because it kind of sounds like a guitar because it's a clav through a distortion pedal. Right. You know, and a clav is basically plucking guitar strings. It's got a similar pickup structure, all sorts of stuff. But, you know, what's different is sort of like, I'm sure there are guitar players out in the world that could do that type of like diatonic fourth thing. But like, because I played it on keys, it's just with two hands, it's just, there's a smoothness to playing those harmonies together that like, I'm not a great guitar player, but like, I just don't, it'd take a different tuning to be able to like kind of one finger it. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's just
totally, there's
a way that like, it sounds like a guitar, but in my mind, it was only playable that way on keys. I mean, so to me, in that sense, it's by far one of my favorite moments on any of the Dawes records that I've been a part of, because it kind of like, it surprised all of us. And I still get people like saying that they've referenced it at a certain point to use on their own tracks. And it's really flattering, you know, and I can only take so much responsibility for that because, you know, we work so collaboratively as a band, but especially with Blake producing that record. So much of my process with that was taking cues and following his lead a little bit, and then going back and forth. It's like if I started on organ and he were to say go to the clav, it's like I'm going to the clav. Like that's what I want to
Right.
do. I want to learn from Blake, and I want to work with him like that. And I think that spirit was, made that record something really special. It was cool.
Yeah. And then to work with like Dave Cobb, and like you guys have worked with all these great producers and engineers and
Yeah,
stuff.
Dave's fun.
Oh man, it's just like there's so many, and you can see from record to record. Like I like the early Doll stuff, but when you came in, man, like there's a difference. It's like pedal to the metal. Like as soon as We're All Gonna Die came out, and then every record after that, and then Doom Scroller. I want to talk about that really quick because were you guys listening to Zappa and the Dead and like what? And I read that recent article where Taylor was talking about like we're embracing how we are as a live band now more on records, which I grew up playing and I still do play in jam bands. And like I feel like you don't have to be a jam band in the sense of Fish or whatever, but you can be a band that embraces improvisation as well as you guys do. But like, were you guys listening to Zappa and the Dead and all, like when all that music was being written? Because it comes out like the middle of Everything's Permanent. That sounds like a Zappa tune. It sounds like it could be on the Mothers of Invention record. You know what I mean?
I mean, 100%. Yes. I mean, Taylor went through a huge Zappa phase when he was writing like the structure of those songs. And, I'd have to think about how long before we went in to record or when he went in to write that phase or that discovery began for him. Like I was pretty late to get into the Grateful Dead. But I went through a heavy phase with that. And I think, by nature of being on tour together so much and all these conversations we have, like music sharing and talking about what we've been digging into, it definitely, we all kind of got on the same page there musically. And also because it was something really different for us. Like we felt like it was a pretty low, I mean, maybe low stakes isn't the right thing, but we went into that record feeling pretty free. Like maybe there's always a certain amount of stakes involved when money's getting spent on records and you expect a certain return on the effort and the investment as it is. Like maybe it's self-induced, but like we are self-imposed, but that one was pretty free. Like we didn't know exactly how it was going to turn out. It was really complicated. But it was a beautiful time for us when I think about it, because we were still in the very early stages of the pandemic, really, all things considered. It was like October, November of 2020. And we didn't have there wasn't a lot of other pressing matters necessarily. Like I think it was before any of us had kids. We were just musicians off the road at that point, trying to figure out like what to do with ourselves. And we would just go to the studio every day. And we didn't have, because we did it in Topanga Canyon. So we were, a lot of us were commuting across town, but Jonathan Wilson's studio is out there on the west side in Topanga, and it's a beautiful location, very serene. He's such he's just a brilliant dude, but he also just, one of my favorite things about working with Jonathan is the vibe is just always right. It's never, he never chokes the vibe being too intrusive as a producer. He never steps in when he's not needed. He's the perfect producer, engaging when he needs to push things along, when he needs to make suggestions, or when he needs to take a break himself and go make himself lunch and hop on the phone, whatever he needs to do, and let the band work out what the band needs to work out. And it was just so loose. And so, the Dead, Zappa, those were big influences. I think the environment that it was a huge influence just overall. I'm trying to think of any other big ones. Like I'd say Zappa was probably the biggest influence, but then I think we were just getting into a psychedelic headspace overall. So even
Yeah.
apart from jam bands, like we would take breaks and just watch videos on YouTube of all sorts of random weird stuff. Like, I don't know why. I never really caught on to it. I mean, I certainly appreciate it, but a few people were like obsessed with Tubular Bells. I don't know if there's like this performance in the round of Tubular Bells that's just like, okay, I can appreciate it. But we were in this sort of like, we were living our hippie dream a little bit there.
Yeah, man.
And, you know, I think it really was conducive to the music that certainly drew from those influences pretty heavily too. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm ready for more of that. You guys can keep doing it and I'll lap it up because it's just such a great record. And it's funny because friends of mine that didn't know about the band before, that I've been turning them on to them now. And like my band's even covering Cafe now because I'm like, I love that middle part.
oh,
I like,
awesome. Yeah. Oh, it's so much fun to play. Good God.
Dude, so fun. And
I get lit up every time that section comes around too. Like out of the, and we all hit this offbeat and we're into this middle section with the riff. It never doesn't feel extremely good, you know?
Yeah.
So I appreciate that for sure.
And Griff's, like the way that he approaches like fills and stuff, it's almost like reminds me of like the way that like Ringo filled in a way. It's like not your typical, it's not what you would think from a drummer at that point. You know what I mean? Like and the way that he kind of fills into those parts and the way that he arranges and writes his parts are so interesting as a drummer. Mm-hmm. It just, when you guys all come together doing something like that, it has its own thing. It's like this beautiful moment. But that record, man, that it's so great. And I know we're running out of time. But I wanted to really quick mention Homebodies is killing.
Thank you.
That the way that album sounds is just sonically gorgeous. Like everything is perfectly placed in the mix. Like you can hear every little nuance. I mean that record, I know that's like 2 records as far as like your solo stuff is.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Like because I had like an EP with some, you know, different stuff on it since then. But thank you. I mean, like the Homebodies was a big step for me because I had been sitting on material for a while, and it was I'd always aspired to, you know, maybe not make a career in jazz exclusively or anything like that. I never wanted just to do that, but I was starting to feel kind of bottled up. Like I did want to be represented, you know, as a writer, as much as a member of a band or a sideman on other projects. Like I wanted to present that kind of even more for the writing than any of the improvisation stuff. Mm-hmm. And I just starting to feel like really anxious about like, man, you know, you got these tunes and like you've played some gigs, like we've got to get it down on, you know, and then the fact that it came out was just a series of lucky scenarios for me, I feel like. But you know, I can't speak enough about Ground Up, the label that put that out and is putting out other things of mine, and like they've been so supportive, and it wouldn't happen without them. Like I could maybe self-release, but like it would have, I'm not that organized, so it's like it would have taken forever. And you know, and I was just really, it was just such a huge sense of relief kind of to do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that it's not everybody's cup of tea, I'm sure, because of its jazzy leanings and such. But, you know, I've been surprised at how many people in the Dawes world, like fans of the band, appreciate certain elements of that record. Certainly Griff is a big part of that record. So, you know, it makes sense that people would be drawn to what he does and his sensibility as a musician. And it was inspiring because now I have another one in the can. It's ready to go. It'll be coming out this year, later on in the year. Nice. You know, and it's a bit of a continuation of that effort with Homebodies. So it sparked something in me to like, not above other things necessarily, but to come back and try and prioritize that when it makes sense, because it, you know, it really just makes me it's very self-satisfying to like write something and then be able to hear it, have other people hear it, even if it's just 5 people. That's okay. It just, you know, I'm glad it's out there for sure.
Yeah, dude. And then release that next record. Come back to DC and play that swanky place.
Well, if I'm playing anywhere, it's going to be there. It might be a little big for me, but whatever. We'll close the room down a little bit, put only a few tables and chairs. That would be the place.
I'll bring all my friends, man. I'll just get as many people in there as I can, dude. That'd be awesome. Killer. All right. Well, I don't want to hold you up, man. I didn't get through everything, but that's okay. Let's do the lightning round get down.
Okay.
All right.
We'll do a part 2 one of these days, you know?
Yeah, man. We can hang again. All right, Lee. So I'm going to ask you 10 questions.
Okay.
Kind of like a this or that type of thing. You can burn through them if you want. If you want to explain your answers, feel free. I'm going to pop on a little metronome for some suspense, about 112 BPM, because that's where I like to fly.
Yeah, sure.
All right, here we go.
Yep.
First one's always the same, Lee. Lennon or McCartney?
McCartney.
Horseshoes or cornhole?
Cornhole.
Puppies or kittens?
Puppies.
Cook in or take out?
Cook in. Okay. I get more joy out of cooking than I do out of ordering food, even though I order more than I cook. But I'll say cook in.
All right, my man. Whirly or Rhodes?
Whirly.
Okay. Swimming in the ocean or in a pool?
Swimming in a pool because I am terrified of the ocean.
Are you really? Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm like, I love, I'm a beach guy. I'm from California. I love it out there. I love staring at the ocean, taking a dip. But the ocean is a terrifying place to me. The current, all the sharks and creatures. I'd rather lounge in a pool and like splash around by the lazy river than go swimming in the ocean any day.
And keep all your digits too. That'd be nice.
Yeah, totally. And not freeze to death too. Jesus.
Herbie Hancock or Chick Corea?
Herbie Hancock.
Okay. All right. This is for soloing purposes. Does it turn you on more to play over a vamp and get creative or play over changes?
Playing over a vamp all day, every day. I don't know when it started because, you know, you learn how to play over changes and that's like, you know, that's the technical study. It's like bebop. It's all these things. I can't help but write vamps. I love playing over vamps. When I sit down, I vamp it out. Like I feel like in my adult professional life, I've only been about vamps ever. So I'm a vamp guy for sure.
I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah, dude, like, I love a good vamp.
Yeah, it's like listening to like John Scofield turn a 1-chord thing into this amazing, you know, improv section. It's amazing.
Exactly. It lets your brain also on that note, like you can vamp it out. Bass player plays the same thing. You can take it other directions to make it sound like you're cycling through changes. Like you have the time to process where it needs to go. And yeah, I think there's just a world of possibilities. Nothing against playing changes, you know, to each his own.
I think it can almost be harder to play over a vamp to make it interesting, to be honest.
It can be, definitely. And that's Feed the Fire is a hard song to play for me because it is a 1-chord vamp. And that's pretty hard to do to make interesting. So
yeah. Okay. Road trip or fly me there?
Oh, road trip.
Okay.
I mean, like if I gotta go to a gig, fly me there because who's got the time? But like if I'm choosing one or the other as like a leisure activity, road trip, 100%. Airports are disgusting hellscapes most of the time. I'd rather be in the car with a, you know, partner in crime and blasting music on the stereo for sure.
We might be the same person. It's a little weird. All right, so here's the last one, Lace. This is sometimes the hardest one, sometimes it's the easiest.
Okay.
But if you could take one record and erase it from your memory, like Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, take that out like you've never heard it before, just so you could go back and experience it for the first time again. Now, what record would that be?
You know, not just because I referenced it earlier. I think OK Computer. I think I would.
Okay.
I would love to go back and hear that for the first time. And yeah, it's just so dense and so beautiful. I think that would be one. I'm sure there's others I could think of, but for the sake of rapid fire, OK Computer, you know.
All right, that's a fair one. It's been,
Yeah.
I've had 120 episodes, and believe it or not, only 2 people have said that record.
Oh, okay, right on.
What do you think is the probably most said record? It's a very famous record of a British band. A British band. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I mean, like people would go Sgt. Pepper's or the White Album, but like maybe Zeppelin 1 or something. I don't know.
Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, Dark Side, really?
A lot of people and like people,
you know,
a lot of people.
Potheads.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the jam band world. I'm a guitarist.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, I was surprised. There's some people that I never would have thought in a million years you would have said that record, but they did.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, that's a heavy one too.
Yeah, for sure. So big thanks to my buddy BV for moderating this chat. We're going to show there's Lee's website. Go check that out. You can find music on there. You can find it on Ground Up's website too, right? I think I saw that today.
Yes.
Please go check out Dawes. Dawes is by far one of my favorite bands. And I got to put a Dawes sticker on my truck now too, Lee. I have my 2 favorite bands before Dawes. The Wood Brothers and Pearl Jam are both on my truck represented.
Very cool. Yeah.
Now I got to get a big fat Dawes stickers on my truck. So
we'll get you one. You're coming to the DC show, aren't you?
I am, with my buddy John, who introduced me to you guys.
Okay. Well, you're gonna get a whole gift bag full of stickers, man. You're gonna put them all over your truck.
Look at that. Yeah, we're coming with our wives, so it'll be a good time. But Lee, awesome. Dude, thank you so much for making the time to do this. Like, for real, man. Like, thank you for the inspiration, musically speaking. Keep doing what you're doing. I cannot wait. That's gonna be my first show, by the way. It's my first Dawes show. So
awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to to hanging in person for sure. And and thanks for having me on. It was great to chat, great to talk music, and I appreciate all the kind words, and like hope we'll do it again sometime soon. But thanks. It's been fun.
Dude. Of course. So Lee, hang on one second. Everybody else, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.